Most people genuinely believe they are thinking for themselves. They believe the ideas they hold came from their own reasoning, their own experiences, and their own careful consideration of the world around them. And that belief feels solid because no one remembers the moment those beliefs were installed. There was no single conversation where it all happened, no dramatic turning point. It happened gradually, quietly, and early enough that it feels like it was always there. If people were truly choosing their beliefs independently, the world would look very different. We would see far more disagreement among people exposed to the same information. We would see more curiosity, more uncertainty, more openness to changing one's mind. Instead, what we actually see is consistency, large groups of people holding nearly identical assumptions, reacting the same way to challenges, and defending the same explanations, even when they've never personally tested them. That kind of uniformity doesn't come from independent thought, it comes from shared conditioning. Most beliefs are not discovered through exploration, they are inherited through exposure, not genetic inheritance, but cognitive inheritance. Beliefs are absorbed from parents, teachers, institutions, media, and authority figures long before a person has the capacity to question them. By the time critical thinking becomes possible, the mental framework that defines what is reasonable, acceptable, and normal is already built, and almost no one is encouraged to question that framework itself. From the very beginning of life, authority enters before understanding. Children are corrected before they can explain their thinking, rewarded and punished before they understand consequences, and taught what is right and wrong before they have any meaningful context for truth. That is not moral judgment, it is simply how systems work. But the long-term effect is significant. Reality begins to feel obvious, fixed, and self-evident. Familiarity becomes indistinguishable from truth. By adulthood, most people don't experience their beliefs as beliefs at all. They experience them as facts, as common sense, as just the way things are. And because those beliefs were never consciously chosen, they are rarely consciously examined. Questioning them doesn't feel like learning. It feels like destabilizing something that has always been there. Here's where discomfort enters the room. Most people are not afraid of being wrong in an abstract sense. They are afraid of what being wrong would cost them in real terms. Belonging, stability, and social acceptance is important. When a belief is shared by everyone around you, questioning it doesn't feel intellectual. It feels social. It feels like stepping outside the group. It feels like risking connection, credibility, and safety all at once. So people don't look too closely. They don't dig too deep. They don't follow questions all the way to their conclusions. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they've learned consciously or unconsciously that some questions come with consequences, and over time, avoidance becomes automatic. The mind learns which paths not to walk down. This is why emotional reactions appear so quickly when core beliefs are challenged. Instead of curiosity, there is defensiveness. Instead of exploration, there is dismissal. Instead of discussion, there is mockery, anger, or silence. These reactions are often mistaken for confidence, but they aren't. They are signs that a belief is doing more than explaining the world. It is protecting something much deeper. When a belief becomes tied to identity, questioning it feels like self-destruction. If this belief turns out to be wrong, then what else might be wrong? And if those things are wrong, then who am I without them? That line of questioning threatens the internal structure a person has relied on for years, sometimes decades. So the mind responds the way it was trained to respond. It shuts the door. This creates a contradiction most people never stop to notice. We publicly celebrate curiosity, innovation, and independent thought. We talk about how important it is to question assumptions and think critically. But in practice, curiosity is only encouraged within very specific boundaries. Innovation is praised only after it succeeds. Critical thinking is welcomed only when it leads to acceptable conclusions. Anything outside those limits is labeled irresponsible, foolish, or dangerous. Pay attention to how those new ideas are usually evaluated. Rarely are they examined based on their actual content first. Instead, people focus on who is presenting the idea, where it came from, and what it threatens. If it challenges an established authority, a cultural norm, or a widely accepted explanation, it is often dismissed before it is ever understood. That process isn't logic, it is social filtering disguised as reasoning. The most effective systems of control don't rely on force or intimidation. They rely on normalization. Once something is defined as normal, anything outside of it becomes difficult to even consider. Not necessarily false, just unthinkable. And people will defend that boundary passionately, even when it limits their own understanding, because staying inside it feels safe. What most people miss is that constant deception isn't required to shape perception. You don't need to be lied to endlessly. You only need to be shown a partial picture consistently. What is never shown doesn't feel hidden. It simply feels like it does not exist. And people don't question what they were never taught to see. This is how two people can look at the same world and experience entirely different realities. Not because one is intelligent and the other is ignorant, not because one is sane and the other is delusional, but because their attention has been trained differently. Attention is not neutral, it is directed, reinforced, and conditioned over time. Once you start noticing this, you begin to see how often attention is guided away from certain questions rather than toward deeper understanding. You notice how explanations arrive already packaged, how curiosity is redirected, and how doubt is framed as a flaw instead of a tool. These patterns are small, but they are consistent, and consistency is what makes them effective. This isn't about blame. It isn't about villains or secret puppeteers controlling every thought. Systems behave according to incentives. Stability favors predictability. Predictability favors conformity. And conformity thrives when people don't question the assumptions that hold everything together. A population that never examines its framework never threatens the structure built on top of it. But something changes the moment a person genuinely asks how the reality was assembled. Not the surface details, not the routines, the habits, or the visible rules, but the assumptions underneath, the unspoken agreements, the things that were never debated because they were presented as obvious. When that question arises, the mind shifts from defending beliefs to examining them. At that point, the question is no longer whether something is true or false. The deeper question becomes why this explanation feels inevitable, why it feels final, why alternatives feel unreasonable before they are even explored. That's when a person starts to recognize conditioning as conditioning rather than mistaking it for reality. This is not a dramatic awakening. It doesn't happen all at once. It's quiet, subtle, often uncomfortable. It begins with noticing hesitation where confidence used to be, and curiosity where certainty once lived. It begins with realizing that some of the strongest reactions you've had were not about truth, but about protection. And once that realization takes hold, it doesn't go away. You begin to notice which questions are encouraged and which ones quietly disappear. You notice which ideas are debated endlessly and which ones are dismissed without discussion. You notice how often consensus is treated as evidence and how rarely assumptions are examined at their root. The most important questions are not the ones people argue about loudly. They are the ones that never seem to come up at all. The questions that feel strange to ask. The questions that make conversations go quiet. The questions that don't fit neatly into the existing framework. Once you notice those gaps, you can't unsee them. And from that point forward, not looking becomes a choice instead of a habit.